Are you looking for a book that will give you a solid foundation of all aspects of science communication for any audience? Or are you exploring career paths in science communication and want to know different niches that are out there? Or are you looking for a great resource for teaching a solid introductory course on science communication? Then this video is for you. In this video, I'm going to share why I recommend the Chicago Guide to Communicating Science by Scott Montgomery to anyone who wants to communicate science in any format to any audience. And if we haven't met, hello, my name is Crystal. I'm a trained biomedical scientist turned clinical researcher and now scientific and medical editor. Since 2011, I've helped researchers to publish in high-impact journals and secure federal and foundation funding. And I've trained thousands of researchers and other professional writers all over the world to equip them with the principles, resources, and systems they need to write well and with intention. So why do I recommend this book to anyone who wants to communicate science? This book offers great practical advice on all the formats you can use to communicate science, including research papers, reviews, proposals, graphics, presentations, and theses. It also has chapters dedicated to translation, to teaching, and communicating to the public. And it even has some guidance specifically for people who speak English as another language. So it covers a lot of ground. And I'll add a link to the book in the description box for you. But although this book has breadth, which is really valuable, it does not have as much depth as some of the other things I've read. But if you're looking for a really solid foundation of all aspects of science communication, this is a great book. Now, I will say that I do not agree with everything in this book, just as I don't agree with everything in any book really. But I want to share some of my biggest takeaways from this book. So early in the book, Scott writes, "The ability to write and speak effectively will determine in no uncertain terms the perceived importance and validity of your work. To a large degree, your reputation will rest on your ability to communicate." So your ability to communicate will influence your reputation and how people perceive your work. And I think this is so true because your science could be a 10 out of 10. But if your communication skills are at a 3, then your science will seem like a 3. But if your science is a 10 out of 10 and you have good communication skills at a 10, you can showcase your science at a 10. And this will build your credibility, strengthen your reputation, and give you more influence in your field. So I really appreciate how Scott highlights again and again in this book that your ability to communicate science is just as important as doing the science. And he says, as I've said many times in this book, advancing your communicational abilities is part of advancing your research. I also really appreciate Scott's efforts to discourage the focus on writing rules. He writes, "This is a book of advice, not rules, guidance, not demands. It means providing you, the writer, with certain understanding, techniques, and attitudes that will aid you in gaining command over the language you produce and consume for a living." This is such an important distinction. I often say that writing is based on principles and not rules. And the key to good writing is knowing the principles and then intentionally choosing when to apply certain principles to achieve the outcomes you desire. And I know that having black and white rules can make writing a lot easier. And I think that grayness of using principles is part of why writing is so hard. But when you have a solid grasp of the principles, you can get better control of your writing. And as Scott says, to communicate well, you need to feel at least some degree of control over the language you are using. Also, later in the book, Scott talks about the advantages of the connection between writing and teaching. He writes, writing in particular is always a form of teaching, an attempt to give the reader what they did not have before. Being sensitive to this process counts as an invaluable advantage. This is so good. I've met many authors who think that they are writing simply to deliver their thoughts and share their ideas, but that's not the real goal. The real goal is to transfer those thoughts and ideas to readers. And an effective way to transfer knowledge is through teaching. I really appreciate this perspective because I think it has a lot to do with my own skills as an editor. I have been teaching in some capacity for 25 years, and in that time, I've developed my skills for transferring knowledge and building on my students' knowledge through teaching and through writing. And I think those skills are invaluable for crafting writing that transfers and builds on readers' knowledge. So, like Scott, I believe that when you are aware that you are not writing to deliver information, but to transfer knowledge, you will approach your writing much differently. And I think you will write much better. And Scott has another view of writing that I really appreciate and enjoy. So he acknowledges that writing is challenging, but he describes this challenge not as a daunting task to tackle, but more like the scientific process. So he writes, writing is a process of experimentation. Producing good functional documents involves trying things out, engaging in trial and error, tinkering around. He later says, the process of writing is of experiment and discovery. I love this idea that we are experimenting with words and phrases to discover how we can best share science and transfer knowledge. In fact, I do this when editing. I'll write or experiment with versions of a sentence to discover which one I like best and want to keep in the draft. And I think this approach or mindset is much more fun and even in a way parallels the scientific process of experimentation and discovery. Scott also talks about the importance of simplicity. So he writes, true elegance in science resides in simplicity and restraint. I think this quote captures an important part of clear communication. So clear communication is not about cramming in as much as possible or continuing to wish that you could use an unlimited number of words or figures or references. It's about focusing on simplicity and giving readers only what they need to know. And it's about showing restraint and being intentional about what information you include and how you share that information so that you can connect with your audience. This idea of simplicity is so important, and it's a big part of why I created my course, Scientific Writing Simplified. In case you want to know more about it, I'll add a link to the description box. So the quotes I shared from this book have a lot more to do with approaches and mindsets in writing because that's what really stood out to me. But in this book, Scott goes into much more detail about communicating in different formats and for different audiences. And this book has more than 300 pages packed with concrete, practical advice that you can use to advance your communication abilities and, in the same vein, your research. I highly recommend reading this book. And even though this book has more breadth than depth, you can learn great advice and find what inspires you or what you might want to learn more about. And if you want to learn more about how you can write well when it comes to the writing itself, check out this video about the book that changed how I think about scientific writing. And if there's something in particular that you'd like to learn more about, let me know in the comments. I create these videos for you, so I want to make sure that I'm creating something that you will find valuable. Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely day, and I hope to see you in the next video.